Hey everyone, I hope you are all well and safe wherever you are. And I'm very happy that now we are going to go into second week, and we're going to deal with the state building and state failure. But before doing that, follow up on what you have done to now. It's just now I've seen a lot of your responses, so it's a follow up from the first. Thanks for all the introduction. They were very interesting. Now I know a little bit more about who is listening to or seeing my presentations, and it's not optimal, but it's much better than not knowing that you're just a name. But now there's some meat on it. I could see that several of you were supposed to have been in Berlin, and that's for those of you who didn't make it to Berlin or haven't been in Berlin. I would say that's very sad, because Berlin is in fact a fantastic city, and it is still not so overdeveloped as most other capitals in Western Europe. And that is and the reason for me saying that, because I already visited Berlin in the early 80s, and I visited Eastern Berlin, which was very different from the West. In fact, it was I went to two marriages where some people from East Germany, they got married to some Danes, and then in fact they could get out of East Germany, and they moved to Denmark. Most of these marriages was convenience marriages. At that time, it was very much about we were open for all immigration coming from the Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. These things have changed today. One of you has already had a course in comparative politics. I hope that this will not be too similar to the one you had, and I hope that we can address your needs also in this. So you also will find this course very interesting and amusing. I also see, and that's perhaps not so surprisingly, that you're all very interested in what happened in the world. That means what also happened outside the United States. And it was also interesting to know about your academic, non-academic interest. That's I found very interesting, and your interests are very, very broad, I would say. That's, but thank you very much for this. I'm still missing some pictures, so to have some sort of a picture of who is who would be very nice. I am missing 5 introductions and input. Please bear in mind the time limits, but there are 5 who haven't contributed yet, and hopefully you will do it from now on. It's important in order also to pass this class to contribute. One student is based in Germany, and I'm very, very happy for her, Ms. Molnar, because thanks to her, I was capable of solving some flaws in the first presentation. So you all got access to the presentation when you were getting up in the United States. So thank you very much, Ms. Molnar. But then the rest of you are covering all the time zones of the US mainland except Hawaii and Alaska. So it's really diverse in relation to that, and it gives us some challenges in order to have the real-time lecturing. But we should see whether it's possible. The options for the classes in real time are Mondays So Monday the 20th of April, Monday the 27th of April. If it goes well, then we'll do it again the 4th of May. And if it's a success, then we'll do the 11th of May. So see whether you can make it. The timings will be 5 o'clock in the afternoon here in Denmark and Germany. And then Pacific time, 8 a.m., Mountain time, 9 a.m., Central time, 10 a.m., and Eastern time, 11. Inform me if you cannot make it. We will record it. So those who are not be able to make it, you can see the records afterwards. But I really appreciate that you can participate, also because we will have some interaction and the contribution while we are doing the presentation, or in between the presentation. So please tell me within the week whether it's that means before Friday, whether you cannot make it. Otherwise, I'll anticipate you can make it, and I will do something where I will share it on, so you can use the Zoom. I would suggest that you all download Zoom, and then we'll make it from there. And I have seen a lot of critique on Zoom that it's not encrypted well, but I don't expect that we are going to reveal any national things of national secrets here, or which can be used against us. So I think it's safe enough for us. Apologies for last time. See me the last session last Friday. It was difficult to hear. I'm trying now to speak much louder. But if there's any problems, please inform me. If you have any questions to the about, then please tell me. Now I'm not in the office because the offices are closed. This is a national holiday in Denmark. In fact, this time of the year, that's where we have all the national holidays. That's in the spring. So there'll be a different lighting, and you can see pictures of my daughters, which they have painted when they were small, in the behind. Yes. Corona 1, I call it Corona 1, the assignment. I liked it very much. In general, it was very good responses and good reflections, and it gave me a lot of motivation for the future sessions. Thanks very much. Just keep up the thinking and the work. Thanks. And the coronavirus and COVID-19 is not over yet, so we are studying it while in development. So some of the things we may come up with now may find out that, well, history has changed, or the context has changed, so it's not the right thing to do at the time. So our task is to look at the data and avoid being biased or predisposed, which is rather difficult in such a participant country like the US. But it's very different from country to country. In Spain, it's also very participant, and there also everything is being discussed. But in a democracy, that's in fact very important. It's fantastic that these things are happening, so that all the time are things which are being questioned. But it's also about when the house is burning, then one have to put out the fire, and then one cannot always sit in the corner and have a discussion, oh, what are we going to do, because then one will not be in control, and the house will be burned down when you have made a decision. So this is one of the dilemmas. And I can tell you that in Denmark now, there has been the whole opposition, and I mean the whole opposition has been very behind and supportive of the government, because it's also a recognition that it is a difficult task. So it also to provide the government with some peace, so that it's not petty politics which is deciding what is going to be done next, but it's very much, how to say, evidence-based, what's going to be the next task. But I can also say that this piece has ended now, because now we are going to discuss the opening, or we are not discussing it. The opening we will have a very slow opening. So now it's all the daycare centers. We have a lot of daycare centers in Denmark. Nearly all the kids, they go into daycare centers before they go to school. So they will open up, and at the same time they will open up in the health sector, so that they can take care of other diseases also. Because the problem has been that there are hardly anybody who is coming to the hospital because they have a heart infarct or something like that. So there's a little scarcity about that. Some of these things gone unnoticed because everyone is just focusing on corona. So you came up with many very important issues, such as mortality rate, how many are affected by it, hospitals bed, number of ventilators per person, equality, how the head of government is handling it, communication by the executive in general, how it is affecting different regions differently, how different are the different countries. And I would just say that there's one element, I think, which is there are several elements which could back up, but one important thing is the time element. It's about how things are spreading. It started in Wuhan in China, and then it spread, and in Europe it blew up in the northern part of Italy and later on in Spain. And what it was, so it's about, it hit different countries at different stages. And so it's very much also about what do you do when you get the first person ill, and when do you realize that you have a problem at hand that can in fact explode in your hands. So, and there in a way, in Europe, we've been fortunate that that somebody in Europe was hit before us, so we can see what happened. And it was in fact when it all started, and there was a meeting with all the health ministers in the European Union, and then they asked for help in Spain and Italy, and then they were saying, you just get your act together in order to not be in the same position as in northern or in Italy, where in fact, and the same in Spain, where in some places the health system didn't have the capacity to manage. And at the same time, that's also an experience that we got, that every country was just looking for itself. So all the ask about the help, it was just about looking for get the acts together. And part of it is because some of these things where most countries were independent before, or they were self-reliant, they, due to globalization and production all over the world, then a lot of this central production has been stopped in the particular countries. For instance, Denmark used to make a lot of serum for vaccines, for vaccinations, and but we sold it some years ago, and then in fact also you lose control of it, or and things like that. So it has, in a way, it has also shown some of the worst side of when all come to all, then all the countries is just so. Just like Trump is saying, America first, then all the countries, they did the same when the things happening, because the countries was lacking ventilators and different things. So the time element. So in the US, it's you are a couple of weeks behind than in fact what we're doing in Denmark. See, I have another one you did is another. It's the strategies or tactics that the countries have adopted, and they are very different. Say, I told you before, we owe a lot to Italy and Spain because we learned from we got some weeks to prepare ourselves so we could avoid what happened in Italy and Spain. So, but that's it's not very nice, but that's in fact the reality. But then also it was in Europe, it was interesting to see that the UK and particularly in the beginning, and Sweden, they follow a different path where schools and bars were open, but with limitations. And it was very much about on people themselves, what they can do and things like that. Their approaches, their approaches there, they were also claimed to be based on science. But the approach was very different from Germany and Norway and Denmark, where, and particularly Norway and Denmark, we more or less locked down everything and locked the border very, very fast also, and sent all the non-essential public employees home, and also private businesses. So, and then they were encouraged to work from home. And we do have a tradition for working from home because when our kids are sick, then, and in Denmark, because nearly all men and women, they are working. So we are used to be able to do some work from home where it's possible. So, but now it has been much more. But it's also the countries are so different. Denmark is a small country with a population. The density is very high compared to, for instance, Norway and Sweden. And here below you can see a meme. It's about Swedish. And we also have different culture. So we are more distant and cold. That's in Denmark and in Sweden. So you see a meme about the Swedish bus station before coronavirus. People were standing far away from each other, and a Swedish bus station after coronavirus. I don't know whether any of you have been in Africa, but if you take the bus in Africa, and you're the first going up in the bus, you're sitting alone. Then the next coming up at the bus will go to your seat and sit beside you. That will not happen, even though he or she doesn't know you. That will not happen in Sweden and Norway. And it's also about culture. It's about, in Italy and Spain, they also have the closed family, but it's very much an extended family. While in Denmark and Norway, particularly, and partly also in Sweden and in Germany, or in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, we have this, our unit is, a family is very, very small. And then our grandparents, they live for themselves and take care of themselves, just like generally in the United States. So that perhaps also why it spreads, it continued to spread in Italy and Spain. And while we have been very successful in Denmark until now about containing, it's like this, that the virus is spreading very, very fast and rapidly, but we have been capable of to lowering. So it almost is, if one is contaminated with the virus, then it's expected it's going to another one will, so 1-to-1 is going to be hit. While if you don't do anything, it was, I think it was up to 3, and then it expands very, very, very fast. So for the time being, it's under control, but the economy is completely shut down in a way. So we expect to really have a decrease in our GNP for this year. But the government has put in a lot of money to businesses, to employees, in all different sectors. It's a lot of money, and fortunately, Denmark had a strong economy for some years, so it's worse for other countries. But what is happening is also, it's a lot of restrictions on freedom. See, generally I've been staying at home for 3 weeks, and I just slipped out to the office twice, and then I go to the supermarket alone, not the rest of my family, to shop, and they put up different requirements in order to, when you're in the queue, they have lines so you can see where you're going to stand and all these things. But it's but more than 10 you are not allowed to stay together, and people are really looking if you are not following the rules, and you can get a fine. And but there's one special thing. It's about in fact, if you are going to organize a political meeting, then there's no limitation, because otherwise it will be against the Danish constitution. And it's also in order to avoid that people will say that this is made because there's an opportunity to take over power, to control, like for instance when I wrote about Hungary, where suddenly, for instance, many of the laws which has been made in Denmark had been made very, very fast, and most of them with the whole parliament behind. We have a minority government, but the whole parliament behind. But most of them, they have, we call it a sunset clause, that automatically they will run out. They will run out. They will not be in effect anymore, I think, in the beginning of next year. So there, it will not be able to continue. It's not like in Hungary, where the Prime Minister Orban, he had taken all the power. There's no limitation. So before, his party had more than 60% of the seats in parliament. So now his control of his grip of power in Hungary has just increased considerable. So and the European Union is criticizing, and it is in fact very disturbing, because one of the basic elements of the EU is really that you have a strong functional democracy, where you also had an independent judiciary. But in Hungary, they control the media, they control everything nowadays, and at the same time, the freedom of speech, they use that also because there's a lot of misinformation which take place. So they use that also to shut down the voices of, which they in fact have done also before. So that's in Hungary. And at the same time, some of the first measurements, one of the countries who were going to get the most funds out of the European Union was in fact Hungary, due to some different criteria, even though they are not so hard hit as Spain and Italy. But that's another issue. It's about the EU and its member states, and how will that be in the future. Then I bring up another thing. It's about Honduras. I could also have brought Zimbabwe, which I know very much, both of these countries. But in Honduras, they have the president. He has put up the same measurements in many other countries, but it's a joke. And he's using also the opportunity to get more easy funding from outside, and then they have made it through the Congress that they are not there's not going to be control of it. And it's really one of the texts we have for today, the predatory government or the predatory state. That's in fact Honduras. You have a government and they are only looking into it for themselves. That means those who are in fact in the Congress and the president. And they are so much involved in criminality and corruption. The brother of the president is in prison. I don't know how many years in New York. Because of drug trading, and in the court he implied very much also his family or his brother in this. So this, they say, it's the major drug bands that's the family of the president. But they can continue because the US is because he does everything that the government of US ask him, in fact, to do. Repercussion for how the state is functioning in Honduras, then
You see that with all the immigration coming from Honduras, because they don't have any other options. And then at the same time, they have all the gangs, which is so with violence also, and they pay protection money for whatever. If you're going to have selling tortillas in the street, you have to pay protection money to different gangs or to the police. That's but they're also using this in order to control it. And he is, in the light of this happening, then he's, even though he's only supposed to be standing for two presidency, then he is he will run for a third, and he's using this crisis also. So it's again saying to use a crisis as an opportunity for doing some other things. East Asia, yeah, they were very fast. Yeah, but of course there was China where it all happened, but also the way they handle it, it was also, yeah, they have a very their government is a very controlling everything, also the media and things like that, or trying to control as much as possible. So they had some very, very draconic measures in order to control it. And I think we have a lot of questions about, because it's not always you can trust what comes out from China. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the future. But it has some repercussions. So now they claim themselves that now we have solved all this. So now Corona is only coming from outside. And that has, so if you come from outside and go into China, then they will really look into you, even though I think they don't have, there's not so many examples of people. But they also have a very, very bad thing, and that's about the racial issues. So in some places, they're really going after people of African descent. So I think the US and some African countries are also complaining. But in the way, it has also happened in Denmark, where people have not been nice if people have looked Chinese. And it's also happening in other countries of the world. And then that's things I know a little also about, because I have two of my nieces. They're adopted from China, and so they look very Chinese and things like that. But it's very, very terrible, and it's something which repeat itself during all the different pandemics. During the plague in Europe, it was the scapegoat. It became Jewish, partly because some of the Jewish they were traveling around also, because in some countries they were not allowed to settle, but so they travel around. And there's some example from US also with the measles on the West Coast. Then it was also some Chinese which was contained and things like that. So it's dangerous also when Trump is calling the Chinese virus, because it can have some really repercussions. And as I was saying before, if you talk about the flu, the Spanish flu from 18 to 20, which caused almost 50 million people, and most of them were young people in the late teens, early 20s. And they were, and then but we don't call it even though it's called the Spanish flu, then it was only because it was the Spanish king who got it. And in Spain was not part of the First World War, so they had a free press, so they wrote about it, and then it came to other. But in fact, it originated from Kansas, and among soldiers, and they were going to Europe, so it just spread like hell. But we don't call it the Kansas flu or Corona a hoax. There were many people, particularly right-wing people, who call it a hoax in the beginning, and in fact also many right-wing in the United States. And partly it's about it's again saying it's about who do you believe, what do you know, and who do you believe. So everything of the opponent, what they are saying, you don't believe them, and it's also the opposition. They may also use it. So it's for the time being, it's more or less it's. It's President Bolsonaro in Brazil. He continues, while the rest of his government and the Congress in Brazil is it's up at loggerheads, because it's also now it's spreading very fast in Brazil. Going back to USA, it's happening everything. Now it's really found out that it's hitting more Latinos and people of African descent, and it seems to be very much related to inequality. That means also because, for instance, African Americans, they are often suffering from many. They have diabetes, overweight, and things like that, because they what they eat. So there's some sort of a class relation to this. So it's about poverty, and then it has a ethnic face or racial face on that poverty, or on the effects of that. So I would say perhaps more it's because they are the poorest section of the population than it is about color. But it is very interesting, because in the beginning there was a lot saying not even one black person had been hit by it, so we are immune, it's our black color, and that is really has not been the case. Trump was also very late in recognizing that in fact there is a danger, but similarly he has changed on that matter, but also because the numbers are increasing. And it's also hitting different regions of the United States with different effects. The hardest hit is the New York State and the New York City. Then you have different strategies. It's again Dudu Duarte. I forgot to write. He's the president of the Philippines. Everything when it's a war against drugs, it's about shoot this guy, the fellow. And here it's also about if you don't respect the quarantine, they will shoot. And here the other day they shot the first mortality was a 65-year-old guy who was out in the street, which he shouldn't be. So that is a very radical restriction or measure. So it's also about what are the risks the governments are going to take. In UK, where they had a different approach, and in Sweden, they are also making more and more restriction. I forgot to say that it's not only President Bolsonaro; it's also the President Lukashenko of Belarus. In fact, in Europe, it's the only place where they still play football or soccer games. But nowadays, there's hardly any spectators because they don't dare to go. It's not because there's a rule against, but they don't dare to go. Then there's unintended consequences. We don't look so much about these. For instance, in Denmark, the flu was just almost disappearing. And that's partly because we are much better in washing our hands or using alcohol in order to clean our hands and follow the general rules. But it's also because in the daycare centers, that's where the flu is also spreading very fastly. So we are not being contaminated. Some respiratory diseases likewise, but also other diseases. So at the time, the medical doctors say, the general practitioners say, "Oh, we are still open for business. If you are, if you feel you're sick in some way, then you should contact the doctor as you usually do." And it's not because it has economic consequences, because to go to the general practitioner is for free in Denmark. Traffic accidents down. Fewer goes to hospitals. In fact, they are afraid that there are also people with cardiac problems. They also hardly any people are going. But another thing is also about some operations and things like that has been postponed, and that can also have a negative. That could have a negative impact, not only positive. Then the climate, the air is much more clean. It's not only because in the spring everything is bright and light and things like that, but it is much more cleaner now. There, not so many cars on the streets as usually. So Corona hits unevenly countries and people and classes. Poor countries with poor public health systems. It's again saying the argument in Denmark has been that we are doing it not because we think we can avoid everyone getting it or until we get a vaccine against it, but it's to ensure that our public health system, our hospitals, that they can manage. They have the capacity to manage those people who have to be intensive care or who needs a ventilator. That's but in, for instance, Honduras, they don't have a good public health system at all. So there it is. It's perhaps more that the head of government is trying to control the issues, and it's also very much in many of the poor countries. It is the richer people who are bringing it because they are traveling and then they're coming back. But now it's the poorer which is becoming more hard hit of all, and also made to the scapegoat. That's, for instance, happening in Brazil, where they are made to the scapegoat, even though it was the first really case in Zimbabwe. That was in fact one who just had come from New York, a young guy, 30 years old, and he was a famous journalist in Zimbabwe. And then he came back, and then he was to the hospital, and then it was just the hospital system is just functioning at all there. So there was a terrible article about what had happened in the hospitals. So, but they are using the measurement, and it's so very much for the government to control, to strengthen their control and extraction from the people. Things in families, domestic violence is going up. It's a big problem in a more visible problem. Divorces up for some. They say that in China the divorce rate really went up in Wuhan after you had to stay together, even though you love your wife or your husband, then to be contained for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that's, yeah, you have to be very flexible. Then you really also get to know it. But for others, it's been a nice time also, and because you're together with your children, if you have small children, and you have a lot of time to deal with them. They're also demanding a lot of you to have your attention and things like that, if they are not sitting behind their iPad. Lockdown effect on government, business, employees, national economy will have, that will also have a negative effect on mental health and physical health. So it is in fact what many have said, but also Trump here said at once. It's also we have to beware that to secure that the measures we are using are not hitting us harder than the thing that it's going to remediate. So so that because of the measures we take, then more people will die, more people will have a better life, and things like that. And it's really a difficult question, and also because it's having a different effects on different people. So more public health system as a concept does. Yeah, just to mention, because for some of you, you may understand that public health system is saying, it's because it's public, it's not private. But in public health, then it is the totality of private and public services, and seen as one service. In fact, you can go into Center for Disease Control and see there also their definition of public health system and what it's supposed to be. to do. So United States has a different public health system than Denmark, and but it's based on private hospitals. So it's again a single payer system, may have private hospital doctors. In Denmark, we do also have private hospitals, and we think we have organized it in a good way. So we are using the private enterprise in relation to, so it's strengthening the public health system. And then in fact, all our general practitioners, they are in fact private. And then they are organized, and then they have an agreement with the government. So it is very different, but it's for free to go to the medical doctors in Denmark, but you pay for go to the dentist, and that's not subsidized very much. In Sweden, you have to pay a nominal amount every time you go to the public or to the general practitioners. So it's very different also from country to country. Just single payer versus private during Corona. The positive thing with single payer is everyone is covered. No need to think about how to pay. That's particularly for the poor people, the poor section. It's a good thing. Then it's about, and then one line of command. The government is in control of the resources and tactics. It doesn't have to refer to laws about we are at war, and then the government can force private enterprises to do something for it. Just like the government is doing in the United States with the 3M, saying that you cannot export, you have to sell it to United States. But it is problematic. I read that in the United States there was different states which were competing, so they were overbidding in order to, because many places in the world there is a need of protection. For protecting so that you're not contaminating the virus. And particularly it is tragic that medical doctors and nurses and others who work on the hospitals, that they don't have the proper protection. It's terrible. We will deal more in depth with the comparison of public health system later. Then we will also look into the effects of the coronavirus, again, because it's changing all the time, and we'll know much more, and we'll know when it has stopped in the United States, and we will know whether the effects of the slow, careful opening of the system in Denmark. I can say that the peace among all the parties in the Danish government, that has stopped now. Now they're really arguing about the opening. Now it's the opposition is saying, or some of the opposition parties saying, "Oh, the government is playing too safe. Should also be permit small cafes, hairdressers, and things like that to open." So that is but it's again, the figures have been looking good for some time in Denmark. And now the fight is the opening, also because according to the different the health authority in Denmark, there was different ways that they could open, and the Danish government has chosen the most safest way, and where some of the opposition say, that's too safe, and in fact it has too much negative effect of the government, of the economy. But it is difficult decisions too. How much does a life cost? And in a democracy, then people will say, or the political party, nobody say, we won't pay for that. It's worth nothing, or something like that. Or we just, with this Vironas, we just should let all the old people go. That would be very good for the economy, and because then we don't have to pay for all these people on the elderly home, and they don't produce anything, things like that. But that's sometimes with strong economies. Yeah. So I would like, there was a question from one about the assignment due on Wednesday. See, it's just to say, identify a problem or a phenomenon you would like to research. Then follow, it's you who choose it. Then follow the 7 steps provided last Friday, 10th April in the presentation. Define what kind of case study is most appropriate. For instance, explanatory, explorative, descriptive, multi-method, or other ways. And here, just to repeat, you are only required to describe what you would do during the 7 steps and what you expect to get out of it in the end due to the way that you have made it. So you're not going to necessarily going to do that study. That even one could do, taking one simple element and then compare with others from different states, taking from statistics, and then how to do it. So it is possible, in fact, to do it. Then remember, it is from Flubia, but it's not only from Flubia, from the text from last time. Remember, you're still a novice. That means somebody who's going to start to learn. To become a master in this trade, you have to undertake several case studies and several kind of case studies. Because it's again saying, it's all of us when we learn something and then we become very, how to say, you become very, you can easily also become very dogmatic. This is the way, and this is good, and this is bad. And then the more you get into things, you find out it's much more complicated, or these figures from this country, it doesn't cover the same as these figures from the other countries. So therefore, you can easily have a comparison where you say, oh, statistically, it is this and this and this. But then when you go into it, it's covered really big different, or the data covers something else, in fact, because the systems are so different. So now it's coffee time. I hope that you have a good time. Take 5 minutes before you get the next